All right. So if we'll see if some last minute people come in, but to start with just a little bit of uh, logistics for the format for this call. I'll be sharing a lot of insights. There'll be a lot of talking. There'll be some sharing. And one of the ways that I really invite you to participate while I'm doing that is like both simple questions and a way to give some feedback when you're having an insight. So we'll be using the chat for this. A common practice I really like in these calls is if you were having an aha moment, like a wow, that actually hit something, something's happening, I'm seeing something fresh. I actually encourage you to write into chat an exclamation mark is the marker for you're having an insight or you just had an insight. And it can be an exclamation mark alone of wow, or you might share a little bit about what you're seeing. It also helps me know when perhaps to slow down because the popcorn is popping. And I don't want to get in the way of it popping by sharing even more of my stuff. I want the insights to do their work. Because the goal of this call isn't so much me downloading information, it's what you end up hearing and what you end up seeing as a result of me talking a lot and perhaps some other people talking and sharing and asking questions. And if you got a question during this call, I encourage you to write it into chat, starting with a Q, like a capital Q. You write the question, and I encourage you to keep any questions that you have really short. I may or may not get to them. If they're long and you start going into story, I'm probably not going to get to that because an hour goes by really quickly. So there's so much that I would love to pack into this hour that we're probably not going to get to do. So we want to keep things tight, including the questions. That said, I'm going to assume that this is our cohort. In a couple minutes, I probably will be locking the room to prevent people from coming in the midst of it and wondering what's going on, because that can be a sort of leaky container. But so let's dive in. So this call, it's the first Insight Salon I've done, I think, since January last year. So it's been a while. We're exploring desire. There's this question of what do you want? Really simple question, but for some reason it seems to be really confusing and triggering, or brings out some sort of like dissociation and avoidance or playing small. There's all sorts of ways that we can sort of wrap ourselves up and get confused or avoid the answer to this very simple question. What do you want? Like in this moment. A common exercise that I often give to clients is to do a desires inventory. To like just sit down with a blank sheet of paper and ask yourself that question, what do you want? And just brainstorm, going for quantity, not quality. And because it starts bringing up all the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this call today. So to simplify some of the ways that we relate to our desires, I came up with a couple archetypes that people often fall into. So one very popular one, especially if you've been in personal development land for a while, is the empowered archetype. If you want it, you must do it. If you have a desire, then create a plan and execute. you've probably at least experienced this if you have friends who are coaches, where it's like, oh, well, I kind of want to do this thing. It's like, well, are you going to do it? When are you going to start? When is it going to be finished? It's, yeah, it's like that. And there's an energy to it and there's a push to it. So that's one archetype. And another archetype is the person who's realistic. You do it if you know that it's going to work. Like, I'm a realistic person. I plan, I'm not crazy, I'm not going to hurt myself doing it. Like, I'm rational. I know what's going on. I know what's going to work and what's not going to work, and I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to keep it realistic. So that's another one. Those are the two main ones that I'll talk about. Another one that came to mind as I was thinking of archetypes is shiny. You've probably met these people as well, or you might be one of these people. Like, ooh, I want to do that. Ooh, I want to do that. Ooh, I want to do that. It's sort of like bouncing back and forth between empowered and realistic, because there is like the empowered part of, if you want it, then start doing it. But it doesn't have the empowered part of keep doing it. It's like, ooh, I want that. Oh, wait, I want that too. So I'm going to go for that. Or I want that. Or it's like, oh, it doesn't seem to be working now. So I'm not inspired in this moment. So I'm going to drop it. So you can kind of think of shiny as bouncing back and forth between empowered and realistic. So just by show of hands, like of those three archetypes, okay, like who here is probably more empowered? You can like physically raise your hands. Or if you're hidden, you can raise your hands on the, yeah, awesome. Stephanie, Jonathan. So yeah, it's like, we'll do it. Okay, who here is realistic? Like, you'll do it. Okay, cool. We've got a lot of realists here in the room. Who here is shiny? Like, very much Evan. Some sort of. Jessica. Yeah, shiny's fun, but there's something missing. Okay, actually, it's Evan. Yeah. Okay, so let's start to explore some of these. So first, I want to dive into understanding what's going on with this idea of being empowered with our desires. And this is going to shed light on realistic later on. So someone who's empowered, when they do the desires inventory, it becomes a to-do list. Every single thing that they think of, they believe that they have to pursue. Like, oh, I want this. It is now a goal. It is now a project. It is now an obligation. One of the downsides of this is it's really exhausting. Like, and you start to subconsciously not want to have desires and not want to do things, because anytime you think of something, you have to do it. Anytime you admit to someone who is empowered, you know that they're going to ask you to do it. They're going to expect you to do it. There's that expectation. Like, this is where desire ties into expectation. I want something, therefore I must do it. Therefore I have to do it. Therefore I am going to torture myself until this desire is fulfilled. Like, welcome to the empowered paradigm. You might achieve a lot, but you're going to be really, really unhappy. To untangle this, I want to stress that there's a difference between wanting something and feeling bad about not getting it. A desire is simpler than that. You want something, but the desires that I'm pointing towards here, like authentic desires, there's no therefore. A desire is not a decision. It's, you just want something. The desires that I'm pointing towards here inherently feel good. They're enlivening. And the attachment that happens, the clinging that happens with empowered type beliefs and there's other beliefs that lead to attachment. Like that's where it starts to feel like a drag. Like you want something and now I have to do it. It's like now I need to execute. Authentic desire is an opportunity for joy. And that might be the joy within its fulfillment, but also it's just the joy that you feel when you have the desire. Desire feels awesome. Desire is a part of our aliveness. It's honoring that simple part of it. We want to keep that and be a little suspicious about all of the stuff that we start to trail along with it. And there's sort of like a chicken and egg here. When you get that you don't need to fulfill desire, you feel a little bit more grounded and whole, like already okay, like I'm okay not fulfilling that. And when you already feel grounded and whole and okay, it's easier to really enjoy your desires because it doesn't mean anything. Not attaching a story to it. Desires are like a little piece of our creativity. So one of the things that we can do in order to help untangle the situation is disempower our desires. We want to take out the grunt. Actually, I think like Joseph Campbell, he originally was talking about follow your bliss. Later on, after that teaching, towards the end of his life, he also said, I wish I also said follow your grunt. This is sort of undoing that. So to a little experiential exercise for you. Consider if there is nothing at all that you had to do. From that place, what authentic desires begin to arise? And notice the feeling of that space, the feeling of that question. Like everything's okay. And it's cool. What do I want to do? How do I want to play? So I want to give you permission to enjoy your desires. Enjoy the excitement. Enjoy the inspiration. And you get to let go of any attachment to their fulfillment, any attachment to any kind of control. Any attachment to knowing what will happen. Like, I don't know if I'll do anything about this. I don't know if it will be fulfilled. I don't know if it's possible or not. Doesn't matter. I'm just enjoying the desire in the moment. And when you disempower your desires, it clarifies them. They get really, really simple. You just want something. Like, that's it. No explanation, no project planning, no trying to figure out the future, no wrestling with your psychology. It's like, oh, I just want this thing. Just kind of pops up. There's not a lot of thinking involved. Like, desires are awesome, but they're not a big deal. You don't need to explain why. They don't have a justification. They don't come with an explanation or an excuse. They don't um, they don't enforce or imply action, but coincidentally, when you drop your attachment to doing something about it, you do tend to end up in action. When we authentically want to do something and we don't have a lot of thinking about it, we usually just do it. Yeah. And I've got one question. Like, speaking to the adage, like, if you don't have it, you must not want it badly enough. That's very much an empowered belief. You can kind of feel like the macho-ness of it. Like, you just don't want it badly enough. There's something wrong with you that you're not fulfilling this desire. Like, I have this desire and now I've turned it into this thing to make myself feel bad about. And there's like a little bit in there because it can be kind of fun to motivate ourselves, even like negatively. But it's important to know that we're making up the negative for making up it, like that, all that stuff's unnecessary when you actually are in touch with simple, authentic desire. It's a coping mechanism. Yeah. So about taking action, what I said was, when we authentically want to do something and we don't have a lot of thinking about it, we just do it. I don't need to set an intention for which sock I'm going to put on first. I just do it. There's some people where making $1 million is easy. They don't really think about it. They just do it. When we get rid of the thinking, that kind of clarifies everything. It both clarifies the desire. So is it really like an attachment or an idea or some sort of messy thing, so that so you don't actually have the desire, or you get to the true desire. And then you don't have that much thinking about the desire. It might occur to you to do like some little next step. It's like, ooh, I'll do this and then see what happens. So ironically, not being attached to action often leads us to being in action. So that's disempowering your desires. So for those of you, sounds like at least most of the people who are have their cameras on, who are realistic. My understanding of the realistic archetype here, being realistic about your desires, what you go after, it's the belief that your desires need to fit within your view of reality, your view of what is reliable, what is predictable, and what's going to work. And the goal here is to feel safe. Because it's more important to have realistic desires than to face the possibility of not getting what you want. You might catch, like, actually there's like, it's still an attachment. It just has like a different strategy and a different feel to it. But it still comes from this like, oh, desire has to be fulfilled. But it's a different strategy. It's a little bit more of a avoidant strategy. Yeah. And one of the coping mechanisms we have as realistic, I'm probably more in the realistic camp as well, is pretending we don't want it. Oh, I don't really want that. That's fine. That's cool. That's nice for you to have. That's awesome that that person is able to do that. But yeah, I don't really want that. Or even more subtly, like, I'm not sure what I want there. I'm going to just like be vague about it in order to hide. We're disconnected from our desire. And we're actually lying to ourselves about what we really want. And settle for what we think we can get. And it feels small, it feels hollow. And this is where you get that general existential angst of like, you know that there's more to life, but you're not quite sure what it is. Chances are that's because you're being realistic. So a couple ways that this can manifest. One is the realistic archetype. One is that we don't remember what we want. In the midst of life, we get easily distracted. We can only really say yes to the opportunities that are right in front of us that we see. And we mistake what's in front of us with what is important. Like, this is why being able to zoom out and have separate time to consider this type of thing, like what do you want, is really important. We live in a world which is more and more filled with distraction, and getting really good at making it feel like whatever is on the screen right now is really, really important, with all the dopamine feedback and everything, all the addictions. And we forget, like, oops, I forgot. Like the next day you could realize like, oh, that was the opportunity that I've been waiting for decades, but I didn't even recognize it because I was so caught up in what was going on in that moment. Oops. Another way that being realistic manifests is we defer our desires. Like, yeah, I want that, but it's like later. It's someday, or there's a lot of stuff between here and there, and I'm just going to focus on that. There's a lot of people who say that they want things that are actually just in order tos. Money's a really common one. Like, almost no one actually wants money. They want what they think money can get them, and they've often forgotten what that is. They often forget why they wanted this in order to in the first place. You go and do like a training for a year or two, and you forget why you were doing the training in the first place. And because we're realistic and we're going for the things that we think we can get, like I've caught myself doing this, where I want something and then I'll start brainstorming all the things that I could do that might help get there. And I'll start turning that into a project and all sorts of stuff to do. and kind of focusing on that, kind of forgetting about what I really want. And when I'm doing that, I won't be in a good space to recognize the things that might jump directly to fulfillment. Like, oh, I guess I could do that for a couple months or a couple years, or maybe I could just do the thing that I want to do right now. With realistic, we don't create the space for the stuff that we don't know yet. We're hyper focused on what we know. We're hyper focused on what's familiar. Even if the familiar is uncomfortable and we hate it, or at least it's familiar, because I don't know, the unknown, that's scary stuff. The idea that something might fail, we might get rejected, we might spend some time and it might not work. Like, we won't even consider that stuff. And another like subtler way that realistic manifests is when we're afraid of what we want. Like, subconsciously, we're kind of terrified of it happening because we're so used to not getting it. Like, I don't know what that would be like. What if it worked? If you have a desire and like, what if that was fulfilled? And like, us getting what we want can sometimes be very confronting to who we think we are. Even if it's a reflection of who we are more truthfully. But our authenticity is often counter to our personality. So to overcome all this confusion, it's really important for us to, first of all, recognize that we're doing it, kind of like catch ourselves. That's what all this has been so far. It's like, oh, yep, okay, I do that, and I do that too. And to rediscover what we actually want. And to realize that we're okay whether or not we get what we want. Because then you're free to just go out and try stuff. So a strategy for doing that is to get unrealistic. Just for like bend and break out of this box of being realistic about what you want. For a long time in like the initial coaching conversation that I would have with people, I almost always shared the same thing at the very beginning, because at the very beginning, everyone comes in with something that they want. And one of the things that I've been talking about here is happening with them already. So what the secret that I'll tell them is that it's easier to have what you really want than what you think you can get. It's actually easier to have what you really want than just what you think you can get. The people who are really caught up in realistic tend to not even really get much of what they know that they could get. So get unrealistic. Get radically self-honest with yourself. And just give yourself permission to want what you want. There's all sorts of fun ways to brainstorm and inquire. Like, what would you attempt if you knew you couldn't fail? And really, like, each of these questions is kind of like taking a shot at one of the beliefs that gets in the way. Like, well, what if we just pop that bubble? If you knew if you couldn't fail. Yeah, and so if he asks, what if you don't know what you want? Hang out in the asking. Sometimes when you get to like pop all these beliefs that are getting in the way, you will end up in sort of like a blank space. Like, well, okay, that's an attachment, that's a detachment, that's a story. I don't actually want that. I don't actually want any of this. And it can be really powerful to just hang out with the question, what do I want? Not even needing an answer to that question. Like if you just sit down waiting for an authentic desire or an authentic impulse to happen, sooner or later something will happen. You might want to get a drink of water, you might want to go to the bathroom, like something will happen. When you give yourself a space to not know and get really good at getting rid of the stuff that you know isn't desire, you might start to experience tiny actual desires. You'll get a feel for desire. And also, it's sort of like when we're realistic, it's like we've put a cap on our creativity. Actually, when we're empowered as well, there's also a cap. Because there's a lot of desires we wouldn't want out because we don't want to turn that into a project. But being realistic, yeah, you might feel kind of numb. So first, it's removing all the numbing agent to allow yourself the space to start to actually want little things again. And I recommend starting tiny. Some other fun questions, just for like, invite the unrealistic. Actually, another strategy for like, if you don't want anything is play with the idea of wanting really unrealistic things. Even if they're not authentic desires, but sort of like play with big. Like, ooh, what if I want this? I want to like change this about the world, or I want this personal achievement. And see if you can feel the excitement within it. You can put it back down if it's not a real desire, but see if you can recognize the excitement, the authentic excitement that comes with desire. Other fun things to ask, like if there's the miracle question. If a miracle happened tonight, how would you know when you woke up the next morning? Like what's changed that you know that a miracle happened? Like that sort of pops the bubble of like, I need to do it. But, ooh, I'd really like that. You know, Stephanie will like this one. Uh, what's a goal that would make you gasp, grin, or giggle? Like feeling that authentic excitement. Sophia, you asked if I could explain that one again. Which one?
Sorry, the one about like if you had a miracle, it's not parsing for me.
Ah, like if there's something about your life that you'd love to be different. And if overnight a miracle occurred, like God, spirit, universe changed everything in your favor, and you woke up the next morning, how would you know that the miracle occurred? It's a very open way of asking, what do you want? That takes a lot of the you out of the question. So underneath all of this, one of the things I've been pointing to is getting a feeling for authentic desire, getting a feel for desire, and also getting a feel for expectation, so that you can start to unravel these from each other, be able to tell one from the other, so that you, whenever you think up this like cluster of like, oh, I want this thing, which you can sort of unravel, take out the expectations and acknowledge that there's still an authentic desire there, and become a connoisseur of this feeling, become a connoisseur of your desires. Let yourself be inspired by them, to delight in your deepest longings in the moment, to feel, give yourself permission to feel excitement without expectation. It's that kid in a candy store feeling, like, ooh, 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 I want that. That'd be awesome. I'm okay if nothing happens. I'm okay if I don't get it. But that'd be cool. And see if you can feel that excitement. Like, what's the felt sense? Even more fundamental than the idea of a desire. What's the felt sense of desire? And if you can feel that, that's a little bit more access to who you are. That's closer to your core. Yeah. So there's another layer here. There's a wisdom behind desire. So this is getting a little bit more into the spiritual aspect. Authentic desire, when we've let go of these stories and expectations and the psychology, when we've like sort of let go of all that, and we're getting closer to something that's subtle, that's exciting, it has an energy to it. That feeling, that's one of the places where the personal and the spiritual are interacting. It's a little bit of a dance that's happening there. This is where, like, this is that connection between desire and potential. Noting that the language that makes this connection could be misinterpreted as some of the empowered model. Like, oh, I want this, therefore this should happen. But coming from this feeling, like you get that it's subtler than the language. One of my favorite quotes that points towards this, it's from Ralph Waldo Emerson. There's nothing capricious in nature, and the implanting of a desire indicates that its gratification is in the constitution of the creature that feels it. Our personal desire, cleansed of our stories about it, our interpretations, cleansed of all that, our personal desire is part of natural intelligence. So it's not a choice between either being a victim of our desires, being pulled around by our ego, or having to subjugate and not feel desires in order to be connected with the spiritual. Authentic desire is part of it. So there is an aspect here of, it's part of the being guided. One of my favorite ways to describe this is that something awesome is trying to happen, and it's your job to allow it. Authentic desire is one of the ways that we experience the something awesome that's trying to emerge. So aligning with your desires is not just suffering less around your desires. It's also aligning spiritually. Like, spiritual integrity includes honoring that energy. Honoring what wants to come through you. And keeping that clean, what wants to come through you. There's a lot of not knowing. Your desire might have a particular form or direction to it, and by allowing it, it ends up leading you, like, the next moment into something else. Because I had this question for a while of, well, is desire just the ego? How does it interact with spirit? And my aha was like, oh, the desire is emergent too. It's not a competition between who wins, the personal or the spiritual. It's recognizing that there's a dance between them. And this feeling behind it is one of those ways that we get to participate in that dance. So with about 14 minutes left, I'd love to open it up for anyone who'd like to ask simple questions or to share an insight. And for this, feel free to raise your digital hand, or if you're on camera, you can raise your actual hand. I'll be able to see you. Melissa. Let's see.
Yeah, I can get started. I was curious. I was thinking about the difference between like a true desire versus like say lust or longing, and is the difference really the lack of attachment?
Yeah, like lust or longing, it as I just hear that now, it seems to imply time being involved. Like you might be able to call desire like a now lust, like a lust within the now, a longing within the now. So it can still have that, the enjoyable and the energy of it. But yeah, as soon as there's a timeline, we're getting away from authentic desire a little bit. Does that land?
To an extent, I'm still piecing around it. I mean, it's like I guess what comes to mind is like let's say someone has a desire for a family. That I guess is that would be like if it's now, then that becomes an attachment thing. Versus if it's like eventually, but how does that become not the whole like putting it off till whenever of the kind of of what realistic? I think.
Yeah, so there's a lot of thinking right there. And the desire doesn't imply like there's a desire within it. So in a way, the work here is to find just like the authentic desire part, to kind of ignore all the thinking. And the cool thing is when the thinking drops away, you just have the desire, there's usually like a next action that comes to mind. One of the cool things is worry disappears. You might end up doing something, or you might get to a point where like, oh, I don't know. And there's two types of I don't, actually I'll share like the three kinds of I don't know, which are really important distinctions. For most people, I don't know is a problem. I don't know, and that means I need to figure it out because I'm not okay if I don't know. The world is wrong until I know. Or I'm wrong, or something's wrong until I know. That's the most common one. There's also like the I don't know just as a simple truth. Like, oh, yeah, I don't know. Nothing more to it. I just don't know. There's also the I don't know, which is a little bit more of a strategy. I don't know as wondering. Like, like what do I want? I don't know. Ooh, what do I want? Like that's a looking. So the latter two I don't knows, like I don't know, and I don't know. Those are really useful for cutting through when you've got a lot of story. Actually, I would even try on, especially for all of you realistic people, if you think you know, try saying to yourself, I don't know anyways. Both when it comes to what do you want and what do you think is possible. But yeah, when we drop all the thinking, that's where we have new ideas. that's where we start taking action. That's also where the little miracles start happening. Like if we're up in our head, really convinced about what should happen and what's going to work and what's not going to work, not much new tends to happen either in our heads or in the world. Like we tend to get a repeat. Just fine if what's going on is we want to keep going. But when we let all that go, one of the cool things about authentic desire and following them and like letting things just occur to us, we get surprised. It's like that opportunity to be surprised and delighted by life. One of my favorite things when I am like asking for something or setting a goal or an intention is to ask for that or something better. Like I'd love this or something better. Like this would be awesome. And if you got something even better than that, cool. All right, so I had 2 questions I get to ask. I'll start with Lucy's. How to untangle the shiny archetype. Ooh, that's a good one. It's sort of like part of the disempowering the desire is one of the things that might be helpful. Like realizing that if there's something shiny, you don't have to chase after it. Like you're okay if you don't go for the shiny. The shiny's not going to go away if you don't chase it. It's sort of like, I often use the metaphor of a river when it comes to insight, but it also applies to desire. Like you don't need to jump into the river and like try to drink all of the water in order to be okay. It's a river. There's plenty of water. You can always go back for more. And especially if you're in the shiny archetype, you having a desire is not a scarcity. If you don't go after this shiny thing, another one will be along in a moment. So part of it, like realizing that you're okay without that particular shiny. I want to check to see, Sebastian, did you still have a question?
Mine was also about shiny, but with the aspect of following, like following lots of desires, and it just sort of like feels like I'm not really landing in a place. So I'm thinking, okay, well, non-attachment to that, but then I don't know. I just not sure non-attachment to that is the most beneficial way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not knowing might help you there too. Acknowledging that not knowing, and actually for a lot of these things, like acknowledging some of the desires, going into not knowing, some of this territory can be quite vulnerable. Like when we start detaching from some thinking that's been very common or that we've identified with, the detaching can often be an uncomfortable process. And it's helpful, not required, but it is really helpful if you have the luxury, the privilege of having some time to just sit without any expectations of yourself. sometimes the value of meditation isn't to do with having a greater awareness. Sometimes the value of meditation is the value of just doing nothing for a couple minutes and realizing that you survived. And part of this is dropping the story that there's like dropping the destiny story, that there's a way that this should play out. Like as if there were this, as if the natural intelligence were sort of a masochist and was giving you hints about what you're supposed to be doing, but not really telling you, but will punish you if you don't get it right.
That resonates.
Yeah. Like there is an intelligence, but that's a very human psychological projection onto the intelligence. Like I started to get suspicious when I looked at the stories about all the Greek gods and how they were behaving. Like, okay, yeah, I don't think the divine is like that. Like there's like that's just human psychological projections onto the divine. So yeah, like there is a magic and guidance and like nudges towards better things. But once you start thinking that you know what that is, once you start thinking that there's a right way and a wrong way, that's getting caught up in the psychology. Like it's so simple. Like that's one of the tells. Like authentic desire, wisdom, being in the flow, being with the Tao is so simple. And it's often really challenging for the psychology because it's not really buying into the psychology. Yeah. And with that, we are at time. If there's like some little insight that you kind of want to claim for yourself, feel free to just like put a sentence or a couple words into the chat. Like, what was your biggest aha? Yeah, and as a takeaway, what I want to point towards is like, get curious about this. See if you can really get a feel for desire. See if you can really get a feel for expectation. And the more obvious that discernment becomes, the more night and day, the more naturally this territory will become less sticky, less problematic, and cooler things will start happening. And after this, I'll be sharing a recording with all of you of this. And feel free to email me if you've got any shares about insights, if you've got any follow-up questions, or if there's any particular, if there's anything I started to cover that you'd love more resources on, feel free to ask me about those. And I'll stay on for maybe a minute or two, just to say like, hello and goodbye to friends who are here. Thank you everyone for joining me today for this Insight Salon. Awesome to see you all.